All questions, questions orales. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it's against the law for Cabinet Minister to own stocks and investments unless they are in a blind trust. Now, the Finance Minister has been caught, and now reports indicate that at least 4 other Cabinet Ministers are using the same loophole to maintain control of their investments. So, a very simple question to the Prime Minister. Who are they?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, everyone in this House refers to the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner to ensure that we are following the rules and putting in place the things that Canadians expect us to expect of all parliamentarians. And it's interesting to note that the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner has made recommendations to members of all parties and in previous governments. And the mechanisms that the Finance Minister currently has in place are very similar to the mechanisms that the previous Conservative Finance Minister had in place. I'm assuming he followed the Conflict of Interest Commissioner's advice.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we know that the Finance Minister was exploiting a loophole to shelter $5 million he made from his family-owned, publicly traded company. Now we learn that 4 other of the Prime Minister's Cabinet Ministers are using the exact same loophole. So again, a very simple question. Who are they?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, exactly to avoid situations in which mud is slung, in which personal attacks are made, we have a commissioner that governs and engages with all members of this House to ensure that the rules are followed. The Finance Minister, all ministers in this House, and ministers of the previous Conservative government follow the advice and the recommendations of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. That's how Canadians can continue to have confidence in what everyone in this House does.
Honourable Chef de l'Opposition.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister found loopholes to remain in control of his company. And now we learn that there are other ministers who've done the same thing. It's a very straightforward question. Could the Prime Minister tell us who are those other ministers? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, all members in the House work with the Commissioner to ensure that we follow the rules and that Canadians' expectations are met, expectations with regard to our assets. So that everything is in order. We follow the rules. Mr. Speaker, we will always follow the rules and recommendations of the Commissioner, just as the former Conservative Finance Minister did. He followed the Commissioner's guidelines, just like the current Finance Minister.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Let's try again, Mr. Speaker. Canadians are entitled to know who the other ministers are. The ministers who didn't place their assets into a blind trust, as the law requires. So, once again, who are they? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we have confidence in the work and advice of the Ethics Commissioner. We follow that advice, as I expect members opposite to do. It's something Canadians expect from all of us. They expect all MPs to follow that advice, and I can ensure Canadians that despite the personal attacks coming from our opponents, everyone follows that advice and has confidence in the Commissioner. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Incredibly important to know who these Cabinet Ministers are. Like the Finance Minister, they could be profiting from investments and stocks while making decisions that could impact the value of their own assets. Now, if the Prime Minister is so sure and so proud that they're following all the rules, why won't he just tell us who they are?
Yeah. Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this place is healthy because of a lot of back and forth, because the opposition has a responsibility to challenge and criticize the government and make sure all of us are doing the right things for Canadians. But the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner is there to ensure that above all the petty personal attacks, Canadians can be confident that people follow the rules and fulfill their responsibilities. That is exactly what happened. The Conservatives have nothing else to talk about because Canada is doing so well, because the middle class is growing, because people are...
Order. Alors, on a raté peut-être.
No, member for Rimouski-Nejet, Témiscouata, Les Basques.
Mr. Speaker, there might be something broken with this device because every time the Prime Minister speaks, all I keep hearing is, we're entitled to our entitlements. The Ethics Commissioner actually said that other ministers than the Finance Minister could have benefited from those loopholes in the Conflict of Interest Act. For a Prime Minister who said that he would be enforcing the highest standards for his ministers, we are seeing that he can't even keep the bare minimum. So I have a very, very, very simple question once again for the Prime Minister. Who are these other ministers identified by the Commissioner?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, not only on this side of the House do we follow the advice given by the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, as the Minister of Finance has indicated, we're willing to go above and beyond her original advice. These are the facts of the matter, Mr. Speaker, and the issue that the Conservatives and the NDP are attacking on a personal level on is nothing but a distraction because our economy is doing well, because Canadians are benefiting from growth, and they have nothing else to talk about than us, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Rimouski-Nejet, Témiscouata, Les Basques.
Commissioner, under the bus today, they are hiding behind her. And the fact is, he can't enforce the bare minimum standard of ethics. 5 ministers are benefiting from this loophole in the Conflict of Interest Act, and last week, this government voted against the NDP's proposal to close that loophole. Now that we know that multiple Liberal cabinet ministers are benefiting from this loophole, maybe the Prime Minister would like to reconsider his position. Will the Prime Minister take the Ethics Commissioner's advice and close this loophole?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, not only do we support the Conflict of Ethics and Interest Commissioner on this side, Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner on this side of the House, but we do follow her advice. That is something that the members opposite can't seem to understand, as they constantly criticize the work she's done, the advice that she has given to all parliamentarians. When we arrive in this House, Mr. Speaker, we follow the advice of the Commissioner because that's what we are expected to do. That's what Canadians expect us to do. And these personal attacks just happening because they have nothing else to talk about. That's why they're obsessed with us while we focus.
The honourable member for Rimouski-Nejet, Témiscouata, Les Basques. Mr. Speaker, last week the Ethics Commissioner wrote us to confirm she too had concerns about the Finance Minister's sponsorship of Bill C-27 and the benefits Morneau Chappelle would derive from it. It's as if the Natural Resources Minister controlled an oil and gas company. He'd be in a conflict of interest. So the question is, could the other ministers identified by the Commissioner also be in a conflict of interest? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, when members are elected and when people become ministers, they consult the Ethics Commissioner to ensure that they follow her recommendations and that they're in keeping with the rules that Canadians expect all members of this place to follow. That's precisely what we've done, and that's what we'll keep doing. The fact that our friends opposite have nothing else to talk about or criticize, that's because things are going very well with the Canadian economy and for the middle class. The honourable member for Laurier Ste. Marie.
Coco Thurlow, survivor of Hiroshima and a great Canadian, will accept the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons.
Here, here.
Setsuko played a key role in the UN's adoption of the landmark nuclear ban treaty. And she has described the Prime Minister's refusal to sign the treaty as a lack of courage. Will the Prime Minister wake up to the reality of this global threat to humanity and join the nuclear ban treaty?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to have the opportunity to rise in this place and congratulate Mrs. Thurlow for a lifetime of activism on an issue that is not only dear to her heart and to many Canadians, but to this government as well. We know we have to continue to move forward to reduce nuclear weapons in this world, to make sure that our children and grandchildren are safe. That's why we are so proud to show leadership on the nuclear fissile material cutoff treaty that engages both non-nuclear and nuclear weapon-owning countries to move forward on disarmament. That is something that we're going to remain focused on because we know we need to create a world without nuclear weapons.
The honourable member for Richmond Athabasca. Mr. Speaker, Yvon Dallaire, chairman of the board of the Institute for Governance, is the latest person to weigh in on the finance minister's conflict of interest. He told RDI the minister had clearly been in a conflict of interest for 2 years now. If the minister still claims he has nothing to hide, could he prove it by telling us what he has in numbered company 2135042 Ontario Inc.? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance. The Finance Minister, once he took office, met with the Ethics Commissioner to make sure that he was following all the rules. He followed all the recommendations that were made, including setting up a screen, a conflict of interest screen. Last week, he went even further by putting his assets into a blind trust. The minister will always work and has always worked with the Ethics Commissioner in order to preserve the integrity of our institution and Canadians' trust in it. The honourable member for Richmond Athabasca. Mr. Speaker, though he repeatedly says he's not in a conflict of interest, everything the finance minister does proves the opposite. On October 27th, Yvon Dallaire said it would have been wise, even necessary, for the finance minister to sell his shares as soon as he was elected. If he really is honest, could the finance minister tell us what he has in the other numbered company 2070689 Ontario Limited? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Finance Minister, like all members here in the House, works with the Ethics Commissioner, follows her recommendations immediately upon taking office in order to make sure that he followed all the rules governing us. The minister will continue to work with the Ethics Commissioner to make sure that he's in full compliance. And, Mr. Speaker, I think we can be proud of the Finance Minister's work over the past 2 years. He's accomplished more for the Canadian economy than the Conservatives did in 10 years, with 400,000 jobs created. We're very proud of the Finance Minister.
Position, order. House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, what we know is that the Finance Minister owns several other numbered companies with secret assets in them. Unfortunately, we cannot trust this minister to do the right thing, especially when he thinks that nobody is watching. That's clear from the way he hid his Morneau shares over the last 2 years. So will the Finance Minister be transparent with Canadians now and disclose what he owns in his numbered company 2254165 Ontario Inc.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the Ethics Commissioner is responsible for preserving the integrity and the confidence that Canadians have in this Parliament. And the Finance Minister, just like any parliamentarians, has worked with the Ethics Commissioner, has followed her recommendations, and has gone even further, above and beyond what she's recommended. The Finance Minister will always work with the Ethics Commissioner to make sure that all rules are followed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister is mired in an ethical cesspool of his own making, and he seems quite happy to remain there. He got caught misleading Canadians about his Morneau shares, and now he wants us just to trust him, even though he has millions of dollars worth of other assets hidden secretly in these numbered companies, companies like 1446977 Ontario Inc. What's in that one?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Finance has always worked in a forthcoming and transparent manner with the Ethics Commissioner, has followed her recommendations, namely what she saw as the best measure of compliance, to put in place a conflict of interest screen, which has been done from the get-go, a measure that was good enough for Denis Labelle when he was Minister, a measure that was good enough for the member from Milton when she was Minister. That's what the Finance Minister has always done, follow the recommendations of the Ethics Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
When the Prime Minister woke up this morning and saw that blazing headline on the front page of the Globe and Mail saying there are 4 other ministers hiding stocks within numbered companies, he was so concerned that he would have called a meeting in that room on the 3rd floor around that big oval table, and he would have said, ministers who have stocks hidden within numbered companies, raise your hands. Which ones did?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Monsieur le Président. Ce qui est attendu, Monsieur le Président, de tout.
What is expected of all Canadians and ministers is that they work with the Ethics Commissioner, for whom we have the utmost respect in preserving the integrity of parliamentarians. That's what we've always done on this side of the House. We've always been transparent in our dealings with the Ethics Commissioner.
Up there, his hand was the Minister of Finance. He said over the weekend, and if there's something that I can do to make sure that people have absolute confidence, I'll do it. Speaking of his conflicts of interest, one thing would be to reveal what's inside his vast network of numbered companies and trust funds. So, can the Minister, for example, tell us what is in numbered company 2070689 Ontario Limited?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What the Finance Minister has always done and will continue to do so that he can deliver for Canadians is to work with the Ethics Commissioner to make sure that all rules are followed, to follow recommendations. He's mentioned he'd go even above and beyond, but if we just refresh the member's memory, the former Finance Minister, Joe Oliver, was the sole owner of a corporation that held publicly traded securities. The member from Nepean was Minister of Democratic Institutions, had recommendations from the Ethics Commissioner, never acted upon them. So what I see is a bit of hypocrisy, a lot of amnesia. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, I can understand why they're trying to forget their decade in power. Millions of Canadians are trying to forget.
Order. The
Honourable Member for Laurier Ste. Marie. Mr. Speaker, last week we learned that Canada's contribution to peacekeeping has hit a record low since the 50s. According to CBC, UN officials say this government's proposals aren't in keeping with the UN's peacekeeping priorities. In 2 weeks' time, Canada will be hosting the world in Vancouver at a peacekeeping conference, and we have nothing to offer. When is this government going to do what it promised, what the UN has asked for, what the world expects from Canada, and pony up? The Parliamentary Secretary to the Foreign Affairs Minister. Mr. Speaker, we firmly believe that Canada has a major role to play internationally. We're proud of our record, and Canadians expect us to make a contribution internationally, and that is why we are committed to providing $500 million and 600 troops for peacekeeping operations. We're doing this with some care, which is what Canadians expect.
Well, Mr. Speaker, rather than celebrating the first anniversary of another Liberal promise, I'm sure Canadians would rather celebrate a contribution to peacekeeping. However, under both the Liberals and the Conservatives, Canada's contribution has been minimal. Despite this, Canada will be hosting a peacekeeping summit next month, scheduled on the understanding that we will be providing a significant commitment to UN peacekeeping. It's been more than a year since the Defence Minister pledged to contribute up to 600 Canadian Armed Forces personnel and 150 police officers. But this government continues to avoid committing to a specific UN mission. When can Canadians expect to see the Liberals keep their promise on peacekeeping?
The Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, as I just mentioned, Canada knows that we have an important role to play on the international stage. We are proud of our peacekeeping traditions, as our Canadians, and Canadians expect us to make a contribution. That's why we've committed $500 million and 600 troops to return to peacekeeping operations. We are taking our time to make this important decision, understanding the impact that Canada can best play, and that's what Canadians expect of us.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, we repeatedly raised our concerns about the Finance Minister's role in sponsoring Bill C-27, and we recently learned that the Commissioner shares those concerns. The Finance Minister did not recuse himself from discussions around Bill C-27, and the question is straightforward. Can the minister admit he's in a conflict of interest? And what's he hiding from Canadians? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What's expected of all members is that we have full confidence in the Ethics Commissioner in guiding us. And on this side of the House, we will always act in full transparency with the Commissioner and follow her recommendations. That's what the Finance Minister did, and he will be able to continue to serve Canadians as he has brilliantly. The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that the Ethics Commissioner is following up on our concerns and investigating. This will hopefully shed light on the minister's shady dealings, starting with his offshore and numbered companies, his many numbered companies. But after getting caught in a conflict of interest, the minister said suddenly yesterday or on the weekend that he had been caught in a conflict of interest, and he said he would donate the profits. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, to finish up what the member was trying to say. Yes, the minister did announce that he would donate his profits to charity, and I think that was a really great thing to do. It shows his desire to serve the public. He's been serving the public for 2 years now with brio. He's done great things for the economy and for prosperity for all Canadians.
For Barrie Innisfil.
Mr. Speaker, the minister will have to donate $300,000 that he's made today and $10,000 since question period started to charity. In fact, the day after C-27 was introduced, shares in Morneau rose sharply by 5%. By his own admission, the finance minister has made $5.5 million on his Morneau stock alone since he was elected. The ethics commissioner is concerned enough that she's now investigating the minister's involvement in Bill C-27. How could the minister betray Canadians like this for his own financial gain and that of his family business?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've mentioned, the Finance Minister has always worked in a forthcoming manner with the Ethics Commissioner, has followed a recommendation, one of which was to set up a conflict of interest screen, which has been in place and which has been described by the Ethics Commissioner as the best measure of compliance possible, a measure that was good enough for the member from Milton, that was good enough for Denis Labelle back when he was in Cabinet. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Barrie Innisfil.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear that the minister sought no advice from Mrs. Dawson when he was involved and introduced Bill C-27. The minister would have us believe that everything is all right and that he's followed all the rules and disclosed everything to the Ethics Commissioner. Well, she wouldn't be investigating the minister if that was the case. Mr. Speaker, either the minister failed to disclose all of his assets to the Ethics Commissioner, or what is becoming increasingly clear is he willfully and knowingly ignored her advice. Which is
the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. No, he did not. He always followed the Ethics Commissioner's recommendations, which was back 2 years ago when he took office, when he met with the Ethics Commissioner to put in place a conflict of interest screen, which has been in place, which was good enough for their ministers back when they were in office. Mr. Speaker, now the Finance Minister has announced he'd go even further, divesting himself of all shares in Morneau, placing his assets in a blind trust, donating to charity, so that he can focus on the important work that he's been doing for the last 2 years, serving the public, growing this economy, something they've never been able to achieve.
The Honourable Member for